Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Healing with Coherence podcast, founded by Radiant Life Technologies. My name is Michael. I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this new episode with my guest, Dean Hall. Dean Hall is a very special person that I met through Instagram. Dean Hall is a cancer survivor. He is also a marriage and hypnotherapist, and he is the author of the book The Wild Cure. The Wild Cure describes his adventure and his healing journey through his illness. Dean was diagnosed with leukemia, and instead of going through the classical medical way of healing the disease, he chose a different path, which included alternative cures and completely alternative approach. And as he described in our conversation, he decided to trade the fight with cancer for building love for life, which is so beautiful comparison. And my aim in this conversation is to understand a little bit more about why Dean decided to go for a different outlook and different perspective on cancer and on healing cancer, and what led him to do a marvelous adventure and a marvelous record, which was actually to swim the entire length of the Willamette River in USA, Oregon, where actually Dean was born. So the parallel and the symbol of swimming through the entire length of the Willamette River turned into the actual healing journey of Dean and of overcoming cancer, overcoming leukemia. And this is what we're going to be talking about right now. I'll be asking Dean about his experience, about his outlook on health and disease, and I'm really thrilled to take you through this conversation and to help you find some pieces of help and support for maybe your own healing journey that you are undergoing right now. So without further ado, let's go into our discussion, and please welcome Dean Hall. All right, Dean, welcome to Healing with Coherence podcast. I'm very glad to have you as a guest today to my podcast, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Oh, Mikhail, I am as well. We've had several conversations, brief conversations online, and I couldn't wait to get to actually have the chance to speak with you.
I'm looking forward. Just to introduce you shortly to everyone, I already said a few words in the introduction, but just to repeat, for me, you are mainly the record swimmer and cancer survivor, but you are also a marriage therapist. You are an author of a book which I currently read, which is called The Wild Cure, where you explain and describe your adventure around setting your record of swimming the full length of the Willamette River in Oregon.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And I would like to base this discussion around your story, around your healing journey, because this podcast, actually Healing with Coherence, was founded by Radiant Life Technologies. Radiant Life Technologies is a group of people who formed a company in order to introduce technologies which are supporting the self-sufficiency and the healing journeys and ability to heal of people around the globe. So I would like to compare notes with you in terms of how I understand healing and the healing journey, and what has been your personal experience of all of that.
Sure, that sounds great.
Yeah. Let's go. Dean, I would like to start. Actually, I made notes out of the book, and I have a note here. You are saying somewhere at the beginning of the book that you are describing the story of how you went from viewing nothing as a miracle to viewing everything as a miracle. And I would like to ask you, what is your understanding of a miracle? How will you describe a miracle?
Yeah, I would describe it as something astonishingly unbelievable that you would not have imagined and you can't really explain. Something that is wonderful and was unexpected. So that's my definition of a miracle.
Very nice. Do you believe that people are capable of doing miracles?
Oh, way beyond what we would ever imagine at this point in time. I think in the next 10 or 20 years, we are going to look back at the 20th century and now recently our health journey and the way we treat disease as the dark ages. I think so much of our healing has to do with emotional suppression and what we choose as a pattern to think day in and day out.
Okay. Well, that's very similar to my understanding as well. I truly believe that we are capable of doing miracles. I truly believe that actually miracles are our daily bread, but it's very much about the perception that we have said about seeing those miracles, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I for a long time my Instagram profile and my website was entitled Swimming in Miracles, and often because of these big swims that I've done, people mistook that I was bragging about how long and how hard these swims were. But once they got to know me and know my story, they quickly found, I hope, that I believe that once you start looking for miracles, you open your consciousness and your awareness and you start seeing them all around you every day. So much so that you are swimming in them. And so that's why I entitled my profile Swimming in Miracles. But so many people mistook it and misunderstood what I was trying to say with that, that I finally changed the name.
Okay. Well, this leads me actually to my next question, which is directly linked to that. There is another sentence that I wrote down, and that's the chapter one start, where you write, Dean Hall, swimmer, cancer survivor. What does it mean to truly be alive? So you're starting with a question, and I will repeat that question at the end of our discussion as well. But I'm just getting as well a little bit. Maybe I'll ask you with an answer. Does it really mean to be alive to see the miracles of life? Or do you have another explanation about it?
I believe that we all come to this world because of my work, and I'm now I've now been a therapist for 35 years, and so I've seen thousands and thousands of clients over 3 decades. And one of the things that's been absolutely a shock to me is none of us have the same dream as another unless we're young and immature and been brainwashed to believe we need to be an astronaut or something. Most of us, uh, there in 2005, I started asking each client the very first session, what are your hopes and dreams? And immediately, many of them couldn't really remember one, but I would press them and I'd say, no, at one time you had a hope or a dream. What is it? And you'd think it was, especially for us Americans, I want a bigger house, a better car, more money. It was only that twice. All the other times it was, oh, I always wanted to be a plumber. What? A plumber? I always wanted to do this or that. And they were so idiosyncratic. I have come to believe we come to this world with a dream, like an instinct for a goose to fly south in the winter. And as we grow, we follow that dream or identify the dream, but many times because those dreams are so big, seemingly so impossible, that we give up, and or we're told time and time again that we have either no right or no ability to accomplish that dream. But I think as we follow that dream, we grow and become the person we were supposed to become in the first place.
So do you believe, from what you're saying, I'm picking up that the purpose of life, let's say, is actually to express yourself, to reach a point of self-expression, to find that like individual role that you have to play in life, and just go for it?
I think it's this beautiful combination of finding purpose, whatever that may be, that you're passionate about, and that purpose plus the passion creates this dynamism that helps you to learn how to grow spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, and I think grow in love, learning how to be more loving and kind and giving to everyone and everything around you. I believe living fully has to be bigger than ourselves. And this is exactly opposite of what we're brainwashed here in America to believe. Here in America, it's all about us. And I believe because of what I've seen as I've taken people through the journey and the process of therapy, but also as I've watched adventurers or others accomplish big dreams like myself, all of a sudden it breaks down that facade of self-centeredness, and you start realizing, oh, I'm very, very small in a big, big world, but if I have a big purpose, maybe it will have some effect.
When you say big purpose, do you think, or what would be all the description of a big purpose? Is it that we need to achieve something big in life, or is it actually just the expression big, but it could be really something tiny, but which is true to our real self, let's say?
I think it's very different for each person. Like I was saying, one person's big purpose may be to become a plumber and to be the best plumber he or she can be. Another purpose, and I've seen this happen many times with women, is they've been so trained in the last few decades that in order to be a strong, empowered woman, they can't stay home and be a mother. And I've seen many times women cry in my office and say, all I ever wanted to be was a good mom. But now I'm working so hard in the corporate world, I don't have time. And the ones that have been very courageous have quit their jobs, stayed at home, and done what they were born to do or what they felt they were born to do. It can be very different, so different that for me, I believe one of my big purposes in life was to swim the Willamette River. And it seemed crazy. And a lot of people hear it and they don't understand it at all. But for me, it was about inspiring other people, particularly people like me who were suffering from cancer, to refuse to be defined by their diagnosis.
Dean, if I make a step back, when you said about that, the belief of women that they need to make career today, um, and because you are a marriage therapist as well, how would you describe, and how do you describe the difference between the role of the man and the woman in life, in a relationship, let's say? How do you see both roles?
Yeah, it's very different for many cultures and many generations. I don't think you can have a hard and fast rule. That's like saying describe a tree in the forest. Well, there are many different trees and many different sizes and shapes and species, and they all are trees and they all make the forest. And so we're all so very different. I don't know that I could break it down into just specific rules like that.
Okay, okay. So it is very like individual for any couple, you would say?
I think so. That's what I've found. But in our society, we've been so taught. I mean, I think it's a backlash from the 1940s and 50s and 60s where women were forced to stay at home, even though that didn't really suit them, wasn't their dream. And men were in charge, so to speak. And those stereotypical roles became so severely entrenched that now we're seeing the exact opposite. I think we need to just be free to have the courage to be ourselves
I
and
understand.
follow our.
I see.
Mhm.
I see that. Then throughout the book, actually, one of the things that made an impression of you that a couple of times you mentioned prayers. Uh,
Mhm.
you mentioned praying to God. What is your understanding of God? Are you a believer? Do you believe in God? And how do you approach God?
I don't know anyone that has spent as much time in nature as I have that doesn't believe in some form of supreme consciousness. I was raised very conservative Protestant Christian, and I even was my first degree is in theology and Bible. And so, yes, I would say that I believe in God. Have I moved past that? Yes, because another degree is in comparative religions. And very quickly at a young age, I'd always been taught that our form of faith was right and everyone else was wrong. And
Yes.
as soon as I started studying all the religions and started maturing a bit and wondering, "Well, who would have I have been if I'd have grown up in Iran?" I would have thought I was wrong. And so a lot of those walls to faith started breaking down for me. And now I believe that there is some form of higher consciousness and that is way beyond my ability to understand. But I don't call it God, I just call it love. I believe love created this and love creates everything. So that's how I define my faith. The Dalai Lama says the God he worships is called loving kindness, and I love that quote.
I understand. I see. So when you say prayer, and you say that you've been praying for support, for help throughout your journey and adventure. What have been the praise, and to whom you've been praying?
Yeah, I pray to this greater consciousness. Some call it a higher power. Some call it I mean, there are many different terms for God. I get uncomfortable. I tell most people that my spiritual life, my faith, is much like my sexuality. I really enjoy it, and it's really important to me, but it's not something I discuss much. I keep it fairly private.
I see. I see. So
Yeah,
it's an internal affair, in a way.
very much so. But I believe that I alone cannot accomplish anything. But if I ask for uh, the inspiration from the universe and direction from the greater one, that I am given power that I would normally not
I see. I see. Dean,
have.
I'm
In all the podcasts, Miguel, that I have ever been on, no one has ever asked me. So congratulations. We're
I'm
breaking new ground.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, Dean, there is another actually a ground that I see a connection between ourselves. I'm an all life athlete. I love to move, and I've been spending a lot of time moving, especially the last couple of years. Because when I until about my 25 years of age, I did a lot of sports. Then I started building career in the marketing, family, and so forth and so on. So the next 15 years, I wasn't moving that much, but I've never stopped moving. And like the last 3-4 years, actually, after my 45 years of age, I'm 51 now. I've been moving a lot,
Oh,
and
good.
Yeah, yeah. And what made an impression on me as well is you're writing that when you did the first strokes in the river, when you decided to go for the swim, and it seemed like my feeling was like you hadn't swimmed for a long time, but that you had swim before, and that you felt immediately this liveliness that is coming back to your body. So I wanted to ask you, what is your, first of all, what is your relationship to sports and movement? If I picked up correctly, you've done triathlon in when you were younger, and what actually movement and sports and athleticism means to you, and what it brings to your life.
Just about everything physically. I had wonderful examples. My parents were both mountain climbers. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we live in the Cascade Mountain Range, and there are 16 peaks. My dad's climbed all of them many times. Mount Hood we're closest to. It's the tallest mountain in our state, and he's climbed it over 50 times. The family tradition is you make your first climb when you're 9 years old. And so at 10, I climbed the highest mountain in the state. Uh, and in the 50s, my mom made it into the newspaper because she climbed Mount Hood. And in 1952 or three, women weren't supposed to do that. And there she is up on top of the mountain. And so I came from a very athletic family who was really interested in outdoor adventuring and staying fit. My parents were the only one in the 60s that I knew that had an indoor gym down in the basement. We had weights, and they were pumping the weights and doing calisthenics to stay fit enough uh, to mountain climb. And my dad's run most of the world's major marathons. And so it was normal for me. I wanted to be a world class mountain climber, but then soccer caught me, and I
All
fell
right.
absolutely in love with it, and made a team that took me over to the UK, and I got to play over there and study under Liverpool and Manchester and Birmingham.
Beautiful.
And
I'm a Manchester supporter.
are
Manchester
you really?
United. Manchester United.
United, not City, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I nobody liked City until recently when they built this huge billion-dollar club. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, got to study under those guys, and it was both wonderfully thrilling and very humbling because we thought we were the best of the best, and then we went over there and we compared to those guys in the Premier League, we were like Bobo the Dancing Bear, you know. But then I got into running like my dad played uh, soccer or football through college, and then got into running, which led to triathlons. I'd always liked to swim. Whenever we get to an alpine lake, my parents would say, I bet you can't swim across that. And I would, and they'd cheer when I got back. And I always thought what they were trying to do is build a strong man. I was so talkative as a little kid. I think it was the only way they could get about 30 minutes of silence. So I confronted them on it recently, and they're like, well, yeah, maybe. After all these years, I finally caught them. But then I did triathlon all during the 80s and 90s. And then I just got so busy that I didn't have time, but I would work out several times a week, swim several times a week until I got leukemia. And my immune system was so bad, I was afraid to get in a public pool. And so for a year and a half or two, I hadn't been swimming. And out of all, I really missed biking, really missed swimming. And so I still did quite a bit of biking, but I didn't do any swimming. And so when I got back in the pool, it was the first time I'd been swimming in about 2 years.
Okay. Okay. I see. I see that. Well, if I remember correctly, you mentioned at some moment in the book that you had the idea of swimming Willamette River much earlier in your life, in your early marriage, and
Right,
then because of the circumstances, you gave up on that idea. And when I
right.
read that, I was wondering actually, have you ever thought of what could have happened? And I think you're asking that question there as well. If you had went for swimming that river already back then, do you
I
think that something would have developed differently in your life?
Oh, certainly. I think it would have. I'm not sure I could have accomplished it.
Mm,
I was super fit. I was a very good swimmer, but and I've always been very stubborn and hard-headed. But people now ask me, Dean, how did you swim 10 to 12 miles a day for 22 days in 40-degree Fahrenheit water? Uh, and it's hard to imagine. I think there's two things that gave me the ability to do so. The first one is by that time, I'd done an hour or so of mindfulness meditation every day, almost every day, unless I was in the hospital, sometimes even then, for 14 years.
mm,
And slipping into that mindfulness state puts you in a different headspace. So, it wasn't unusual for me to swim 8 to 10 hours a day. And that sounds fun, until you've hit about minute 45 or an hour or two, and nobody seems to care, and you're freezing to death, and it's raining, and you're wondering why you chose to do this. And for a few days, and as I watch documentaries on ultra endurance, first day everybody's excited, second day not so much, third day is where people start dropping out. Usually people don't make it to day 6 or 10,
mm.
much less 22. And the second thing that I think life gave me, that gave me the ability to do this, is I'd been through so much suffering with my leukemia and lymphoma, and then having watched my wife die 15 days for our 30th anniversary, and the torment of that, I had been so miserable for almost 4 years, that being miserable in the water, especially since I chose to do it, didn't seem that bad. Whereas if when I had done it, I first got the idea to do it when I was 24 years old, and I got obsessed about it. And then I did it at 54 years old.
Mm.
And I was a very different man. And especially having gone through that suffering, the suffering that I was enduring didn't seem too terrible. Whereas if I'd have tried to do it at 24, I don't know that I would have given it up, but I wouldn't have enjoyed it. Yeah, I probably would have given up.
Mm,
I
mm.
probably would have deemed it impossible, and there's a reason no one's ever done it. And I probably would have been more reckless and taken more um, stupid challenges that may have killed me. I wouldn't have had a team around me making sure I was safe and making good decisions. So there were a
Mm.
lot of reasons I think life let it wait. Yeah.
Absolutely, like listening to it feels like it would have been much more of an ego decision back then.
Yes.
And although, and in comparison to that, when you went really for it, it was you had been coming from completely different place.
Exactly. That's well said. I think when I was 24, I wanted to prove to everyone I was a champion. And at 54, I just wanted to prove to everyone that we are all miraculous.
Mm,
And it didn't need to be about me. It was kind of funny when toward the end, at first, we got a little bit of press, but then for the first 100 miles, they wouldn't talk to us at all,
mm,
because I think they thought, this is a crazy man. and he might die, and we don't want to be a part of that story.
All
And
right.
then after I passed 100 miles, they thought, "Whoa, this guy might actually do it. This might be a feel good story. This might turn out well." And the closer we got, it was 187 miles. The closer we got to the end, the more it became a frenzy here in the state, and then later on the Associated Press nationally. And I I didn't mind talking to the press, but they wanted me to talk about how big and bad I was, and that's just not me. But I don't know, well, of course, you know, because you read the book, a lot of your readers won't know. One of the most beautiful things that happened is I had 6 kayakers or guide boaters assigned to the swim, and they were going to lead me down the river, because when you're swimming in a river, you can see about 10 yards in front of you, and you can see about a quarter mile in front of you. But danger's always about 50 yards in front of you.
Mm.
And so you need a guide boater who can see that. And all you do is they pick the line, they keep you safe, and they warn other boats if there are boats coming. But most of the time, they're just picking a line to stay away from log jams and snags and whirlpools and all those things that could make you drown. And you just follow the boat. Well, 4 out of my 6 guide boaters dropped out 2 months before the swim. And so I'm talking to my dad, the old adventurer, and saying, "Hey, what am I gonna do? Give me some idea." And he's like, "Well, I got an idea." I said, "What's that?" He's like, "I'll do it." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "I'll do it." I'm like, "Dad, you're 79. No problem. Dad, you've never been in a kayak. I'll learn." And so he did, and we did. And one of the most beautiful parts of that journey is getting to spend that time with him. We realized we'd never spent that much time 24/7 together. We'd done some good climbs and backpacks together, but those were only a matter of 5 days or 3 days. It was never 22. And so getting to share this wonderful adventure with them. But he's real outgoing, he's a real extrovert, and he loved talking to the press. They loved him. So I would just say a little bit and then pass them on to him. And that's how that went, but it was fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Richard, right? Richard.
Yeah, right.
Well, Richard is a character. I really love him.
He is a character for sure.
Yeah, it seems like, like that your relationship with him was very well described there in the whole adventure, and that I was really amazed to see how actually he stood behind you in that adventure, and he just went for it.
Right.
Amazing, amazing.
I probably could have done it without him, but now I can't imagine doing it without him.
Yeah, yeah.
He just made it so much more rich and full. Yeah, it was a wonderful gift given to both of us.
Absolutely. And talking about the other kayakers as well, you had these 2 other men that were coming just for the first like day or two with you, and they stayed with you like how many miles? I don't know, tens
Yeah,
and hundreds of miles.
the first 6 days, right around the first 70 miles.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, Al and Lou, they were both safety guide boaters who go in and rescue people, usually drunk picnickers that
Okay, yeah.
fall in the river. And Al, an old guy, he would never tell you, but Lou took me aside and told me that he'd saved over 100 men uh, in rivers in Oregon, and they were really scared. They tried to scare us away from doing this thing, but then when we realized later the reason they were so scared is the only swimmers they'd ever seen were drunk people who were drowning. And since I wasn't drunk and I didn't look like I was drowning, they thought I was a great swimmer.
Yeah, yeah, huge
Yeah.
difference, huge difference.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but they were wonderful, and they really helped Dad to learn how to pick a line, how to read the river, how to stay safe.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
Dean, let's go to the leukemia. It was the pinnacle of your story, basically, and the start of everything that you were to meet and to on your journey and to experience on your journey. So, if I understand correctly, you had been diagnosed twice, right, with leukemia.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I got leukemia in 2007, 4 days before Christmas. Wasn't a great Christmas that year. And then I was really, really sick all of 2007. I got better, and the type of leukemia I had is never supposed to go into remission. It just goes into management. And my numbers were really good all through 2008, 9, and most of 2010. And then my wife unexpectedly just got really sick. At first, they thought she had pneumonia, and then they realized it wasn't that. And then they thought she had something called Meniere's disease, and because her face fell on the right side.
Mm.
And then finally, when she started to lose her power of speech and she started becoming confused, we went and got a brain scan, and she had one of the largest brain tumors they'd ever seen, way back around the brainstem, and it had a lot of fingers. And then 52 days later, she was gone in 2010. And there's a German doctor that created something called German New Medicine, did a lot of other research, and it's become fairly widely believed in many circles now that there's a real correlation between cancer and trauma. And many times, about 1 year after the trauma, there's a diagnosis of cancer. And, and that was certainly true for me almost 1 year to the day. The leukemia just exploded and came back and brought with it lymphoma. And I'm 6'1", and by August of 2003, then my numbers were terrible. My family and my doctors were worried about me. I was down to 152 pounds, and right now I'm 212. So even when I'm fit, I'm over 200. And so I just looked totally emaciated. I was all skin and bones. Yeah.
I'm aware of the new German medicine. I don't recall the name of the doctor that invented it. I've studied some of it because for certain reasons, and it's good that you mentioned that, like connection to the trauma, because I wanted to ask you how deep did you go into searching for the reasons of the disease, the roots of the disease, right?
Yeah. There's something called mind-body conversations. Here in the University of Washington, there were a bunch of researchers that with brain tumor patients, of course, they didn't do it with my wife because she was too far gone, sadly, but they would ask them to just get in a contemplative state, meditative state, and ask their bodies, is the tumor malignant? How big is it? And where in their brain is it? And write these answers down, put it in a sealed envelope. Then the MRI technician would do the same after the brain scan. He'd write the answers down. 83% of the time, they were spot on. And so they believe that we have an internal knowing or a body consciousness. And so one of those researchers took it a step further where you asked your body, why is this here? And so I started doing that. And it was, I hold on to fear and nurse my anger because there was a lot I was scared about and a lot I was angry about as part of that grieving the loss of my wife. And so a lot of my healing was trying to let go of those things and learn how to manage that.
I see. In connection to that, when you first were diagnosed, if I understood correctly, you didn't feel ill or sick. You went for some examination, right? And only then
Right. In
they told you.
2007,
Hmm.
Yeah, I was getting, because I played so much soccer, and my last year of playing soccer, I was going in for a slide tackle, and it was in the mud, and a guy fell on my foot, and I it stuck my heel in place, and I literally came over my leg and bent my leg totally backwards, kicked myself in the head with my own leg. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. It was the most pain I'd ever been in, and so I'd broken everything in my knee, and I'd been waiting for a total knee replacement for 20 years because they wouldn't let a 20-year-old get a total knee replacement because,
Mm.
especially back in the 80s, there was only like a 20-year expectancy for a knee replacement.
Okay.
And so I waited. Finally, I was 47, and they'd expanded. They'd gotten better with titanium knees, and they were now 50 years. So they're like, okay, Dean, you can have it. So I went in to take the pre surgical blood test. And I'd been living in this little town of 13,000, a farming community, and I taught there for 20 years. And so most of my little 12-year-olds had grown up and were in entry level tech positions all around the city. And um, when I'd gone in, one of my ex students had drawn my blood, and so they called me up and they said, "Dean, your blood test came back bad. I've never been really sick in my life." And and so I assumed that this poor little girl had fouled the test somehow, and I didn't want to get her in trouble. So I said, "Oh, that's fine. Don't get anybody in trouble. I'll come back in." And the nurse said, "What? No, your test is bad." I'm like, "Yeah, but it's okay. Make sure no one gets in trouble." And she said, "Okay, just come back in." I went back in for the second blood test. It still didn't occur to me that it was about me. I kept saying, "Hey, the little girl came to draw the blood," and I'm like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I was kind of counseling her, making sure she was calm so that she'd do it right, not knowing it wasn't about her at all. And then that night, my doctor, who was also one of my best friends, came to my office, and that wasn't unusual. He was so stressed out. I'm also a hypnotherapist. I would do some light hypnotherapy to help him de-stress, usually about once or twice a month. As after I got done with, all my clients during that night. And so he came in and he just looked white as a sheet. And I said, "Aaron, what can I do for you?" And he's like, "It's not what you can do for me, it's what I got to tell you." And I thought, "Oh no, he's again." Still wasn't about me. I was like, "Uh-oh, he's done something illegal. He's in trouble somehow."
All right.
And he sat down and he said, "Dean, you've got leukemia and it's really bad." And I was in such shock. My first thought was, "Oh, good, he didn't do something illegal." And then and then all of a sudden it was like, "What? Wait, no, me? Leukemia?" And I said, "Well, tell me more about what that means." And he's like, "It's really bad." He said, "You have something the oncologist has never seen, so we're sending it away to other places. It's got features of both acute leukemia and chronic leukemia." He's like, "It's expanding in huge numbers every day. We're really scared, and if if this doesn't change, you got days, maybe weeks, and that's it."
Mm.
And my daughter was 14 at the time, and so it was quite a shock. Yeah. Thankfully, it went to chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which bought us time. But I was still really sick for that first year.
Okay. You know, actually taking into account the way how the new German medicine describes the process of cancer and other diseases. If I recall correctly, and I'm not an expert, so I'll just interpret through my words. But
Mhm.
there is a
And I'm not
process
an
of,
expert either.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. So there is a process of, first there is the emotional shock, the drama that happens, and actually later on there is this process of inflammation or whatever happens in the organism based on that, and then the actual leukemia or the cancer is the process of healing of the organism, and then
Right.
eventually the organism heals, dispels, or actually the marks come back to normal and so on. So that's the kind of the theory of the new German
Right.
medicine.
Right.
So which makes me think about, well, I take health as a state of being. How do I feel about my body and myself?
Hmm.
And now you've been you didn't have any indications at that time that you had anything like that. So you had like probably hurting knee or injured knee for a very long time, and you're looking forward to get the knee replacement. And then once we went to the doctor, you got the exams and you got the marks, and you were told the diagnosis of leukemia. uh, how do you think this impacted you in terms of basically admitting that you are sick? Do you think that if you didn't get the and I'm speculating, I know it's a speculations, but it's about how you experience the process. If you were not given the diagnosis and you were not given the forecast as well of life expectancy, do you think something different would have happened? Maybe, I don't know,
Yeah,
you would have even
I,
known. Have
yes,
you thought
yes,
about it?
yeah, yes, and no. I've thought about this a lot, as you might guess. I think the reason I got leukemia, you've got that shock, according to New German Medicine. And for the 5 years previously, I'd been specializing in sexual trauma, especially as a hypnotherapist. So I would sit, close my eyes as they'd recount their sexual trauma in a hypnotic state, and I would try to imagine I was there with them and to really be able to picture it and stay with them, not realizing that the unconscious mind doesn't know the difference between vivid imagination and reality. So 30, 40 times a week, I was privy, and maybe according to my unconscious, illogical mind, experiencing incest, rape, molestation, all sorts of sexual perversion,
Yeah.
and thinking that I was getting rid of it at night, not having enough respect for I'm human. And I think the leukemia was a big wake up call to slow that down and not see so many people with such horrendous stories every week. The other thing was I knew I was very tired, but I was working a lot.
Mm.
So it made sense to me, and I wasn't eating very well. So I think it was a lack of nutrition, all the shock from the sexual experiences I was hearing, the sexual trauma, and not sleeping. If they would have had ADD back when I was a kid, I'd have been heavily medicated. And throughout my life, give me 3 or 4 hours of sleep, I'm good. And I took that into adulthood, which was probably not responsible. And so I started making sure I did my best to get 8 hours of sleep from then on. And
Okay.
so there were a number of things. But like you said, I think it's very interesting. Again, this is something no one's in the over 300 podcasts that I've had, no one's brought it up. So well done. I really believe that if I hadn't been told, particularly by a best friend who I thought was brilliant, that this was a life threatening, dire situation, I wonder if it's what they call the nocebo effect, kind of like the placebo, but in a negative way. It was so shattering that I believed it and became very sick then.
Hmm.
I think my body would have probably resolved itself.
Okay. Okay. That's very interesting. That's kind of, yeah. I was looking forward to not to that specific answer, but I was curious actually what your experience was. But anyway, I believe, and I suppose you believe as well, that we are brought our challenges with a reason. So you were brought that challenge in your life, and actually it brought you on the journey that you underwent,
Right.
which actually ended up to be a brilliant journey.
Right.
Uh, you know, actually, if we stay a little while on the diagnosis, now looking back, what would be your outlook on what are the main misconceptions that people should be aware of when it comes to getting that diagnosis now? What they should know about diagnosis of cancer?
Yeah. Uh, it depends on the type of cancer, but it's so scary to have someone, especially someone you esteem or regard as intelligent or an authority, look at you and say you have cancer. To me, at that time, it meant a death sentence.
Mhm.
And I think it still does to most people. And so, what I'd encourage everyone to do is not become passive and not get hypnotized by a white doctor's coat and think you have to do anything he or she says. Be your own advocate. I fired 3 oncologists. Uh, I learned from this doctor that not all of those oncologists have my best interest in mind. Most of them are just making money.
Mhm.
And now there are a lot of wonderful oncologists, and I was lucky to have a couple. But I ran into a few that weren't. And so, one of the things I think everyone should do as a cancer patient is be the captain of your own team. Develop a support and medical team, but be in charge. And so, every oncologist that I saw, I'd sit down and say, now, please don't hear me being disrespectful. I appreciate your intelligence and your education and your experience, but this is my body. And so I'm kind of like the captain or the manager of the team. You're like the coach. But I'm not going to, if I don't want to do it, I won't do it. And you're going to have to be okay with that. And I will, the way I'm looking at you is as my expert consultant. But let's face it, if I die in a year, you're not going to remember me. If I die, my family suffers. And, and the ones that were great smiled and said, wow, no one's ever said that to me. Thank you. I'm happy to be your expert consultant. One threw down his clipboard and walked out. The other one sat and listened to me and said, I'll never work like that. And I said, well, then you're not going to work with me. Could you please refer me? And he just walked out, didn't even tell me he'd refer me, but his nurse got me a referral. And so I was willing to quietly disregard their authority and maybe even insult them because I'm betting my life on this.
Mm.
And I'm glad I did. I'm not against Western medicine, but I think the biggest problem with Western medicine, particularly in my country, is it's such a money making machine. They're thinking more about how much is going in their pocket and not seeing me as a person. And it's kind of one size fits all. Okay, you got to do 6 rounds of chemo and 5 rounds of radiation, and then we'll take a look and see how you're doing. I think also a lot of people mistakenly think chemo and radiation is medicine. It's poison. It's what I call, and I told one doctor this. I said, he told me it was time for me to do chemo, and I said, I see chemo as the atomic bomb. And if we're fighting cancer, you don't start any war off with an atomic bomb. You leave that as the last effort. And I said, I want to do everything first before I drop the bomb. And he said, well, I never heard it put like that, but I get it. He was wonderful with it.
So what were the cures that you went for at the beginning?
Well, the first one, I mean, just the basics that I would encourage everyone to do.
Mhm.
I cleaned up my diet, got rid of almost all sugar that I could because cancer feeds on sugar. I got rid of a lot of my carbohydrates because those create sugar in my body. I got rid of highly processed foods and fried foods. I started eating 5 to 7 times a day to keep my glucose levels even. Started drinking lots of good water. Started exercising lightly, even if I didn't feel like it, even if it was just walking around the block, trying to move my body a little bit. I started meditating 2 and 3 times a day just to keep my emotions even and to keep my body releasing emotion. I started, and this was the hardest one for me, as odd as it sounds, started trying to sleep 8 to 9 hours a day. I just
Okay.
have never been much of a sleeper.
So did you
So
undergo a chemotherapy at the end, or did you
I
end
have
up
never done
never?
chemo or radiation. And
Okay.
so people online, I get a lot of nasty comments telling me I'm killing people, that I'm against chemo or radiation. I'm like, I even say to them, I've never once said that ever. I'm not against anything. I'm for whatever a person decides is best for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I could
But I
resonate with that.
think the biggest thing for me didn't happen until the second time I had cancer, and didn't happen until I started thinking about doing this swim. And that was, we are so taught to fight cancer. And cancer was beating me up. I realized, I don't know if you've ever been in an actual fist fight. Sadly, when I was young, I got in a lot of them. Is kind of my generation. And there were a couple times it wasn't a fair fight. The guy just beat me all to death practically. And that's the way I say cancer's a bully. It's not a fair fight. So when you fight cancer, it's a terrible approach. So I made the courageous decision to trade fighting cancer for loving life. Even when I had cancer, the way I'm going to fight cancer is to fight it with love. I'm going to love life as much as I can today. And that changed everything. If I hadn't started that, I wouldn't have come across Einstein's Everything's a Miracle and accepted that as a way of life. I would never have considered swimming 187 miles, but every time I thought about it, it just made me happy. And so I thought, it's adding to my love of life. And so that's why I decided to do it.
Very beautiful, very beautiful. So was the idea about the swim an act of expressing love, or expressing love to life?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
And here's what I learned about nature. When I chose to swim it, I called it the Willamette. That's its name. I saw it just as this nice kind of watery highway to take me 187 miles and an adventure. And then after swimming a few days, it started to take on its own personality. I started to feel the river. And so I started calling it Big Blue. And then after about day 6 or 7, some really deep spiritual connections started happening between me and the river. And so I started calling it Mama River. And I believe that we are much more hardwired to be connected to nature than we'd ever guess. And especially since our body mass is 70% water, our brains are 80% water. But on the molecular level, we are molecularly 99% water. So, of course, water being in water, they're going to have conversations. And Mama River had many very healing conversations with me. And so I thought I was swimming to express love, and I never expected all the love that I got from Mama River to come back to me. Yeah. Nature will love you if you get out and connect with it enough.
Mm. I wanted to ask you about that question actually, and you answered it yourself. Like how what we have deprived ourselves of by putting us aside from nature and individualizing ourselves and not feeling part of nature, but actually putting us in a role of masters of nature. I think
Right.
we've deprived us of basically our essential and power of, yeah, like power by heritage, I would say.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the silliest ideologies that I was taught to believe that I no longer believe. I believe the best I can ever do is connect with nature. But one of the things I used to hear mountain climbers say is, "I conquered the mountain." No, it let you climb to the top of it. That's about it. Yeah, it's that silly egocentric view of us as mortal men that we think we're special and beyond. And now that we're learning more about nature and how the plants and the trees actually communicate, and they're all so deeply connected, I think we're going to break away from that self-centered viewpoint, I hope.
I also hope that's the future of healing and of medicine, right?
Right. Right.
Dean, there was a one special moment on your trip that actually really made an impression on me, and that was I made the notes here not to make any mistake, but it was under that bridge, and I wrote you about it to ask you actually on Instagram, right? It was in Portland.
Mhm.
Under that bridge, when you felt, you described that moment as everything clicking together,
Mhm.
yeah, like feeling fully alive.
Mhm.
And I ask you if this wasn't the moment when actually the actual healing came in, because I don't believe it was a moment, it was a process, it was a journey of healing, right?
Oh, sure. Right.
But tell me about that moment. So you were surprised by my question. So how do you feel about that? Was that the moment of realizing that, well, I'm actually healed, and what that meant to you?
Yeah, no, I didn't think of it like that. It was just one of those beautiful, poignant moments. We were supposed to meet the mayor of Portland. He didn't show. We were supposed to meet all sorts of press. Only two came. Uh, and we'd gone 175 miles into Portland's the largest city in our state. And sitting under that bridge, we had started in sunshine, but then it had started to rain. The rain had stopped, and we were about 5 to 10 minutes earlier than when we told the press we'd arrived. So we thought we better stop and wait so that we could arrive, so that the press would be there to take video and pictures, even though they never showed. Um, but I'm so glad we did, because sitting under that bridge, you could see the skyline cityscape of Portland, where my dad was born and raised, where I was born and raised. So it's got real deep meaning. And it was foggy. And so it was kind of mystical in the mists. And we just sat there in quietness. And there was just this deep understanding between us that we are not only very connected to each other in the river, but we'd accomplished our goal, and the chances that it would be successful were pretty high. And we'd shared this beautiful time in life together. And it was just the sweetest moment. Like I told you, my dad's a real talker historically, especially when I was young, I was too. Nothing was said nor needed to be said. It was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had without any words.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, could it have been the moment in which the healing was complete? Certainly. Because it was a time of immense peace and incredible joy. And I think those two things have to be present for healing.
And there is another thing, because I found the notes that I made here. So what you say there is, and I'll read it. It felt like all the
Mhm.
broken parts of me were finally starting to be glued back together, which
Right.
reminded me, it brought the word coherence,
Mhm.
because actually the comrade therapy, which is the technology that I mentioned,
Mhm.
stands for coherence through modulation of radiances, and is
Mm.
based on the principle of bringing or giving the impulse to the body actually to get back to the state of coherence, which is
Mm.
wholeness, right? And this is what reminded me that moment that actually you felt, you swam all that river, and you were collecting parts of yourself, and the river helped you. That being of the river helped you to collect parts of yourself and to glue them together back to coherence. That's why I felt like, well, that was the end process of you getting yourself back together in a way.
Yeah, that makes perfect, especially when you put it just a little bit I know about coherence and water coherence. That makes perfect sense to me. I'll never be able to think about that time again without thinking of you and thinking of the way you've explained it to me. So thank you for that gift.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dean, back to my first question. I promise that I'm gonna ask you at the end of our discussion. So,
Okay.
uh, what does it mean to you to be alive after our discussion?
Yeah. Uh, Full of passion, fueled by purpose, and absolutely present. That's what it means to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been a delightful discussion.
Thank you, Dean. Really, really very nice discussion. Nice to connect to you. It's been
Yeah.
enriching to listen to your story. Thank you for asking me to read your book, because it was quite the experience, and I really enjoyed it. And I read it through a couple of days, and I really stayed with it, and I loved every words of it. Thank you for
Oh,
that.
good. Thank you so much. All right.
Okay. Have a good rest of the day, and all the best, and good health.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, Dean. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us till the end of this beautiful, beautiful conversation. I really hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did, and that you have also learned something new about yourself, maybe understood something new about yourself, about your own healing journey. I really encourage you to share this conversation with your contacts on social media. And if you haven't subscribed yet, to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or on social media or on any of the podcast platforms that you have used to listen to this conversation and to other episodes of the Healing with Coherence podcast. Thank you very much for all your support, for being with us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you with our next guest. Bye bye.